You're listening to Market Champions, a podcast on navigating the financial markets. Here's your host, Srivatsan Prakash.
Hey guys, I wanted to take this opportunity to remind you all to like and subscribe. It really helps me to keep getting the best guests onto the podcast. So I really appreciate it if you did. And now onto the video. Hey guys,
Let's go.
welcome. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Market Champions. Today we've got Jim Rogers, a big name investor. Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
I am delighted to be here, Srivatsan. I hope we will have fun.
Absolutely. So, I wanted to start off with what's going on right now. So recently we've seen a couple of new developments in the COVID crisis. We've seen the introduction of a new vaccine along with a new stimulus bill. So I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on it? Is it a game changer in your opinion?
Well, game changer. It could well be for many countries. The world, whenever there are crises or semi-crises, there are always people who emerge better and there are always people who emerge worse. So yes, for some people, for many people, it's a game changer. For the U.S. in particular, I don't know if you're talking about Canada since you're in Canada, or the U.S. since you're near the U.S., or who. Japan has got staggering amounts of debt now, and they're printing lots more money every day. So for Japan, it's going to be a big problem someday. I own Japanese shares because they're printing so much money, but this is a disaster for young Japanese. Americans likewise. America was the largest debtor nation in the world a year ago. Since then, the debt has gone up by staggering amounts. I've got 2 teenage daughters. It's going to be terrible for them. It's a good time to be old in the United States because young people have a bleak future, at least in the U.S., ahead of them. So it depends on where you're talking about. Some people are going to emerge in great shape. Colombia is going to come out of all this in good shape, probably. Right. Korea is going to be a much less bad place to be once they open the 38th parallel. So when you say game changer, I have to be a little more precise. I can't just call up a broker and say, game changer, buy. Buy what? Right. Where?
Exactly. And as you mentioned,
agriculture, this is a game changer for agriculture because now it's harder and harder to produce goods. So it depends on who and what and where.
Absolutely. And, as you mentioned, number one, it's a game changer for agriculture. And the other thing you mentioned, central banks are printing tons of money. And, historically, printing money has led to inflation. So do you think that we're at the beginning of a new commodity cycle or a new commodity bull market?
Well, I would suspect, as I look around the world right now, I see stocks in many countries like the United States near all-time highs. So stocks are certainly not cheap. Bonds are in a bubble. Bonds are all over the world. Bonds are in a bubble, so bonds are not cheap. Property in most of the world is doing well. There are places where you can buy, in Zimbabwe, you can buy cheap property, but there are many, many reasons for that. As I look around, the cheapest asset class I can find are commodities, and it is, agriculture is the cheapest of the cheap right now. Silver is down 60% from its all-time high. That's not a typo. 60% from its all-time high. Sugar is down 80% from its all-time high. So as I look at commodities, most of them are the cheapest asset class around.
And as you mentioned,
they're going to go up. They are going up now, but it doesn't mean they have to continue to go up.
Right. And as you mentioned, silver is probably a great hedge against inflation as well. So now, do you have a view on dollars? And more importantly, do you have a view on Bitcoin? And is Bitcoin sort of a new digital gold?
Well, you started with dollars. You mean U.S. dollars or Canadian
U.S. dollars, yes.
Or Hong Kong dollars? What
US
kind of dollars?
U.S. dollars.
I own U.S. dollars. The U.S. is will be a basket case. It's the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, and debts are getting worse every day. But during periods of turmoil, people look for safe havens, And for historic reasons, they think the US dollar is a safe haven. So when things get bad again, the next year or two, whenever, people will turn to a safe haven. The US dollar will get overpriced. It might even turn into a bubble, depending on the turmoil, at which point I'll have to sell if that happens. Now, Bitcoin and the US dollar are two entirely different things. Why didn't you ask about zebras? I mean, putting the Bitcoin in the US. Bitcoin is great. It has been great. I wish I'd owned it. I've never bought or sold any of it. Many cryptocurrencies have disappeared, as you know, gone to zero and totally disappeared. There have been hundreds of them, and they're still out there. A lot of people having a lot of fun with Bitcoin, making money. Bitcoin, I'm not one of them. All money will be on the computer in the future. It already is in China. In China, it's almost impossible to even take a taxi with money. You cannot buy ice cream with money. Everything is already on the computer. They're way ahead of most of us. But every country in the world is working on putting the money on the computer now. And they will, and they love it because it's cheaper for them. It's much more efficient. They don't have to, security-wise, it's less money. So there are many reasons that they want and will have computer money, but it's going to be their money. Throughout history, governments have maintained or tried to maintain a monopoly on money. If crypto or any of them, Bitcoin or any of the cryptos ever become successful as money, most countries will probably outlaw it. They always have anyway. And so, fine, it's great now. It's wonderful. Buy, sell, have a very good time. But if it becomes successful as money, I suspect the governments will throw it out. Now, the crypto people say, we're smarter than the government. And they are. Of course they are. But the government's got the guns. The government has tanks. I don't like it, but I know who's got the guns. And I know if the government says something is illegal, most of us are not going to bother.
Absolutely. Today, if you look, I want to move on to discussing a couple of commodities. So, today, a lot of people usually have contrasting views when it comes to oil. Other people believe that, we're going to see a repeat of April where we saw oil go negative, because we've got the second wave of COVID, we're seeing lockdowns again. But meanwhile, on the other end, you've got people who say, well, the central banks, they're printing so much money, and therefore oil will have to go higher. So, Jim, I want to ask for your insight on this. So where are you, and what are your thoughts on oil?
Well, oil did not sell at negative prices. One contract or a couple of contracts in Chicago for a few minutes were negative, but there was nobody selling oil at that time except for those couple of contracts at negative. I assure you, Royal Dutch was not selling at a negative, selling its oil at a negative in those days. And that could happen again because the nature of futures markets, very unlikely now, especially since it's happened once. We had the aberration, unlikely to happen again. What will happen with oil? Well, known reserves of oil continue to decline. They've been declining for years, except for shale oil. But, the shale bubble has burst. There was a time there, if you could spell shale oil, people would give you money. But now we realize, they weren't making money. They got to pay their bills. Lots of them have gone bankrupt. So that bubble is over all over the world. Now, shale oil will continue. There's no question if you have the right technology and the right deposits. But most people, the known reserves of oil continue to decline. So the price of oil is making a complicated bottom. I mean, the way bottoms work is they go up and down for a while. Good bottoms go up and down for a few years and make what the chartists call a good base, and then they take off again. That's what's happening with oil. We're in the process of making a complicated bottom now. And down the road, as known reserves continue to decline, the price of oil will go higher.
And as you mentioned, the known reserves of oil are going down. So a lot of investors have started viewing uranium as a solution or a replacement to oil. So, do you have any views on uranium? Because recently, a lot more people have actually started paying attention to it.
Yes, uranium is clean energy if you do it right. I mean, if you make a mistake, it's very, very disastrous. But if you do it properly and you control it, uranium is very cheap, very long lasting, and clean. It's very, very clean as long as you take care of what you're doing. So yes, I'm not the only person who knows that. The supplies have started declining because it got so very cheap for so long. So like everything else, the Chinese use a lot of nuclear power. A lot of countries use a lot of nuclear power. So I'd rather own uranium than be short uranium in 2021.
In a recent interview, Jim, you mentioned that you were seeing some opportunities in Chinese wine stocks. So I wanted to go at this from a Jim Rogers lens. So, what is the fundamental change that you see taking place in the Chinese wine industry?
Well, first of all, in the shorter term, the virus closed restaurants, bars, etc. So people didn't go out and they didn't go to bars. So
Right.
that really hurt anything to do with entertainment, travel, tourism all over the world. So there are probably opportunities there, and that includes alcohol. Now, in China, the Chinese do not have and have not had a tradition of drinking wine. Had they drink Mao Tai and things like that. Rice wine has been their history. But I would suspect, having seen the way societies and the world works, more and more people in China have discovered and are discovering wine. But very, very, Srivatsan, very, very few people even know what wine is in China. Now, I can remember when I grew up in the US, most Americans didn't know what wine was. They drank beer or scotch or bourbon or maybe rye if they were Canadian. But most people in North America had no clue about wine. Well, that's changed dramatically. Australia, England, many countries now have come to understand wine, and that is happening in China now. And the basic fundamental is that people are coming to have it. Most Chinese have never seen wine, never touched wine, never tasted wine. And I presume that they're like everybody else. Once they learn about it and taste it, they will like it. And I would suspect that since it's coming from a zero base of no consumption, whatever happens, it's going to get better and not worse.
And I agree with you on that. So, and as we are, I wanted to stay for a moment on stocks. So, when you are searching or when you're researching stocks, could you sort of describe your investment process and what you look for in companies before you invest in them?
Well, I mean, none of this is simple. Ideas can come from reading the newspaper and you see a disaster, or the internet. Whenever there's a disaster, actually, the Asians have a word which means disaster and opportunity, the same thing. In China, it's Weiji. In Japan, it's Kiki. Actually, the Koreans, the Japanese, and the Chinese, it's the same character, pronounced differently in all three languages, of course, but they've been around a lot longer than we have, and they know that disaster and opportunity are the same thing. So I have come to understand that when I see a disaster taking place, in addition to feeling bad for the ones who lose, I also start saying, okay, who's going to benefit from this? And that's one place where you might find opportunities. Another is the trees growing to the sky. You see things that never go down and bubbles develop. And when you see that happen, you start to look for where the bubble is. So you can sell it short because nothing goes on forever. Another way, when you see a government do something. I mean, if governments decide they want to solve a problem or change a situation, they spend a lot of money and give a lot of incentives. It doesn't matter whether they do a good job or a bad job. Somebody makes a lot of money when a government decides, aha, we must do something about that. And then they start giving incentives and spending huge amounts. Well, you find out who's going to make the money, and you can make some too. New technology, new ideas. You know, electricity came along at one time. Well, that was a totally new, dramatic change. And if you figured out who was going to benefit, you could have made a lot of money. Radio, I can go on and on. I don't have to tell you. The automobile, the railroad, many new things have happened in life, and they constantly are happening now. And that's another place to find ideas. So there's no, walking down the street. You're walking down the street, you see something, start to think like an investor and say, wait a minute, that's wonderful. And you can say to your friends, look at that, look. But then start thinking like an investor and say, oh, well, wait a minute. Is there a way for me to participate and look at that, not just look at that, figure out a way to participate. You have to do research, you have to do homework, but that's, where do the ideas come from? Then you have to do a lot of stuff. Balance sheet, I start with a balance sheet, the people, the competition. There are many ways. It's not easy doing research. It never has been for me.
And as you mentioned, things don't keep going up forever, and one way to profit off of that is by shorting. So you've got this thesis that we're going to go into the biggest bear market of your life and possibly even my lifetime. So could you give us sort of an update on that thesis? And this market is being propelled higher by central banks and money printing. So would you ever actually go short this market?
Well, Srivatsan, what I said was that the next time we have a problem, it's going to be the worst in my lifetime.
Right.
It's a simple statement. 2008, we had a huge bear market and economic problems, most of the world, because there was too much debt. Well, Srivatsan, since then, the debt everywhere has skyrocketed. To me, it's the U.S. alone, but not just even China. China didn't have it. Nobody would lend money to the communists 25 years ago, but now even China has a lot of debt. So the next time we have a problem, it's got to be terrible because of all this debt. So that's all I'm saying. I don't know when it's going to happen. I guess if people, watch Market Champions, they will find out when it's going to happen. But it's going to be terrible. We have nightmares every few years. We always have. We always will. The next one's going to be a nightmare. Now, the new head of the Treasury in the U.S. says, no, we've solved the problem. We'll never have economic turmoil again. Oh, she's got degrees from fancy Ivy League universities, so if you believe her, you don't have to worry. But I'm even older than she is, and I know she's wrong.
Got it. And as you mentioned, we've seen we've seen debt skyrocket a lot, in Japan, in the US as well. So, and the central banks are sort of keeping yields low right now. And with all this debt in the system, yields can't go any higher. But if yields go lower, a lot of banks will sort of be threatened. So do you have a view on how this will end and sort of your view on the bond market?
On the bond market?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not short the bond market. I'm short a few junk bonds, but at the moment, I'm not short anything. I'm not shorting anything because
How much higher?
when a bubble occurs, madness takes place. And I have learned about madness, having seen a few bubbles and read about many, many more. You cannot believe what happens in bubbles. Go back and read about them if you want. So I'm not short anything right now. I am short a few junk bonds, but and even there I'm losing money because madness is taking place. People are so desperate for any kind of yield that they think 4% from a good junk bond is great. There's no such thing as a good junk bond. Well, there is if you buy change, yes, what companies that are getting better. But no, when problems come, marginal credits always suffer very badly. Right. But I am not going out and shorting anything in a big way now because I see the madness continuing. All the central banks in the world have said we're going to print as much money as we have to. The Japanese central bank said unlimited, That's his word, not mine. You know,
Right,
the
exactly.
English said, we will do whatever it takes. That's their words, not my word. You know, the U.S. has said, don't worry, we will buy as many bonds as we have to. You know, they're going to print money till we run out of trees. No, it's all taking place. So I for one, but I know that when it comes, the end will probably come. This time will probably come before the printing, because things will just get so absurd at the rate they're going. Now, if it happens this way, if the central bank suddenly say, well, we're not going to do it anymore, you better start sorting right then. It's unlikely they will do that this time around, because they're so nuts. I mean, these guys, most of them are academics and bureaucrats. They don't know what they're doing. They just want to save their jobs. And the way they save their jobs is say to the politicians, hooray, hooray, hooray. Everything is okay. It's not, but they will say that.
Jim, I wanted to talk a little bit about, a career. So now, if you were starting off today, what would you actually do? Would you still be an investor, or would you focus on doing something else? Let's say you were me, you were 16, and what exactly would you do?
Well, the answer to your question is it depends on your own passions. I mean, I went to Wall Street. I didn't know what I was doing, but I fell in love because it was my passion. What knowing about the world and knowing what was going on was I didn't even know that was my passion until I realized and got a little maturity. So if you can figure out your passion, and many people never do, that's the answer to the question. When I went to Wall Street, it was a backwater. People kept saying, why are you going there? That's a waste. Don't bother that. Well, I didn't know. Fortunately, I didn't know it. I just knew I loved it. And it was a backwater. I later realized, thank goodness that meant less competition, fewer people. So the answer to your question is do what you love. I mean, if you want to be a gardener, your friends are going to laugh at you. Your parents are going to be dismayed. Your teachers are going to say, what are you talking about? But if you want to be a gardener, you'll never go to work. You'll wake up every day. You'll have fun. And those are the people who are most successful in life because they love what they're doing. They never go to work. They just get up and start having fun. And those are the people and if they don't succeed, they don't care. They're happy. They're very, very, very happy. They're not sitting around worrying about, I'm not succeeding. So, but you will someday have a company listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and you'll be the richest guy you know, and your teachers will call up and say, we always knew it. We always knew it. Your parents will say, remember we gave you seeds when you were a child? Your friends will call up looking for a job. No, the answer to your question is do what you love. Now, I happen to see fabulous opportunities in Asia right now. You know, the West is in decline on a historic basis, and Asia's on the rise. I happen to see great opportunities in agriculture. It's a disaster. Back to the Asian word for disaster being opportunity. But if you don't like getting hot and sweaty, I don't think you should think about agriculture. If you don't like chopsticks, I don't think you should think about Asia. But those are places that I see enormous opportunities going forward.
Absolutely. You've got this thesis on Asia being the biggest thing, or Asia actually sort of this century is China's century versus last century was sort of America's century. And, what exactly is it that has caused America's decline?
Well, everybody who's been on top has eventually declined. Everybody. Historically, it's caused by various things, usually getting too much debt, overextension militarily or socially or economically. The U.S. is certainly overextended militarily. We've got troops in over 100 countries around the world. We've had many wars in the last few years. The debt goes higher and higher every day. And that historically has been a reason that has always led to decline. So in America's case, I would suspect that. But you look at the UK. I I mean, 100 years ago, the UK was the richest, most powerful country in the world. It was no number two. Started spending a lot of money. 50 years later, only 50 years later, the UK went bankrupt. The IMF had to fly into Heathrow Airport and bail them out because they literally were bankrupt. Uh, they're still there, and there's still a lot of people still having a lot of fun. I mean, they discovered the North Sea oil. You give me the largest oil field in the world, and I'll get you out of bankruptcy too. But the UK, same thing happened to them, happened to many other people, and that seems to be what's happening to the US now. Do I like it? No, I'm an American citizen. My kids are Americans, American voter, taxpayer, etc. But I see what has happened in history to other people, and that seems to be happening to us. The UK has got gigantic debts, and they too are spending more and more every day. But even Japan, I mean, Japan's population has been declining for 10 years. That's not a typo, 10 years, and it's going to, there's nothing, nobody sees anything that's going to change that. And the debt goes through the roof every day. The Japanese, at least in America, we accept foreigners, we accept immigrants. The Japanese don't like foreigners. It's
Right.
virtually no immigrants in Japan. So they don't have that to save them. So there are many things that are causing countries to decline now, and there always have been historically. And everybody, now, interestingly enough, China is the only country that's been on top 3 or 4 times. No other. Great Britain was great once. Rome was great once. Egypt was great once. China's been on top 3 or 4. Now they've collapsed, had catastrophe 3 or 4 times. But for whatever reason, after a few decades or a few centuries, the Chinese have turned around and gone to the top again.
Right.
Nobody else has been able to do it. Doesn't mean the Chinese will do it again. I happen to see them doing it now. There will be problems. There will be many problems in China going forward, but I don't see anybody else at the moment.
Right. And you talked about how the US is going to eventually decline, especially with the gigantic amounts of debt they have. So do you have sort of a view on the US dollar as a reserve currency? You think it's eventually going to lose its status? Do you think it's going to lose its status? And if so, do you think it's going to lose its status in sort of like a big event, sort of like Bretton Woods, where we go back to a gold standard or we adopt a renminbi? What are your thoughts?
Well, likewise, no currency has ever been the world's medium of exchange or forever. All of them have changed after 75, 100, 125 years. Every one of them has changed. That will happen with the US dollar. We're already the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. But also the US, in the US, if they get angry at you, they put sanctions on you and say you can't use the dollar. Well, now, that's not the way an international medium of exchange is supposed to work. It's supposed to be neutral, so that anybody, and many countries, are saying, well, wait a minute, this is not fair. So people like China, Russia, India, Brazil, Iran are working on competing mediums of exchange now. So for economic reasons, the US dollar is certainly at the top. And for political reasons as well, I'm afraid we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we're almost forcing people to come up with a viable competitor. So I own a lot of US dollars, as I said, because I expect turmoil down the road. But I know I can certainly see that the US dollar is coming to an end. What will replace it? I don't know. Maybe the renminbi, it's the only currency, but I mean, the renminbi is a blocked currency. It's not freely tradable. So that's an absurd statement in 2020. They are opening it up, and maybe it will open completely. Will people try gold again? If things get desperate enough and there's no alternative, then we may try gold again. It's certainly going to be electronic money, whatever it is. As I said
Absolutely.
before, every government in the world is developing electronic money or computer money, call it what you will. But it's going to be their computer money. And maybe the world will come up with a computer medium of exchange, which all governments will accept.
Right. And if you, Jim Rogers, were in control of the U.S. monetary system, aka you were the chairman of the Federal Reserve, what would you be doing differently from what Jay Powell is doing?
Well, I would abolish the Federal Reserve and I would resign. The market's smarter than I am.
Right.
The market's smarter than all those bureaucrats in Washington. America's had 3 central banks in our history. The first 2 disappeared. This one will disappear too because they're making so many serious mistakes. No, I mean they think they're smarter than the market, and maybe for a week or a day or a month they are. No, I would let the market. I would stop printing so much money. I would let the market set interest rate. Yeah, of course there are problems without a central bank. Problems with a central bank. So I know the market is smarter than all the central banks in the world. There occasionally have been a smart guy running a central. The Indians had one for a while. U.S. has had one a couple of times, but I'd resign, let the market do it.
And would you take us back to a gold standard?
No. The gold standard has been used many times. A problem with the gold standard is people believe it, and as long as people believe it, it's okay. But then the politicians say, well, this is too much pain. Let's find an easier way, and then they start shaving things, they start changing the rules, they start making it a little bit different. And so all the people who believed the government and believed in gold wind up getting hurt because the government changes the rules. Governments, the governments say they're taking care of all of us, but they're mainly taking care of themselves. So the problem with the gold standard is it is demanding and rigorous and disciplined, and politicians don't like that. And then all the people who believe it get hurt in the end, and some people benefit when it changes, but that's not the way this is all supposed to work.
Right, exactly.
The only thing that has worked historically is when the market decides what to use. Once upon a time, you could use seashells or cattle or sugar cubes or silver. You could use whatever you wanted. That works because then people say, listen, I don't want your seashells. I only want silver, or whatever it is. Whatever people decide they want, that becomes accepted and stable because it works. And if it doesn't work, people start moving on to something else.
Right.
I promise you, the great unwashed, all of us peasants are smarter than all those PhDs in Washington. I'm an old peasant, and us old peasants know at the moment, silver and gold, we better own a little silver and gold when things go wrong.
Right.
The bureaucrats are saying, gold, forget it. It's a anachronism. Okay, I'm an old peasant. I want some gold and silver in my closet.
Right, exactly. Hey, Jim, I've got 2 more questions for you. So the first one that I wanted to ask is, what was the craziest thing you saw on your 2 trips around the world?
Well, I've written a couple of books about them. I have at least 2 books full of answers to that question, and not everything.
One right here. This is one of the best books. I think everyone listening should go read this for sure.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Went around 3 years going around the world in a special car, and it was a lot of fun. And border crossings, deserts, being held hostage. I mean, lots of things happen out there in the world. It's a very exciting one. It's a great adventure. Now, I'm happy to be alive, but I guess I am a bit lucky to be alive. Many people try this sort of thing and either have to give up for many reasons or get killed. I made it both times, and I'm alive, so I'm very pleased.
For my last question, Jim, I wanted to ask you, what is your single best piece of advice for investors today?
For investors today?
Right.
Well, they have to be extremely careful. They have to become knowledgeable, watch Market Champions and become knowledgeable, because once you become knowledgeable, you will see, you'll get worried because there are problems coming down the road and they're going to be serious problems. But once you're knowledgeable, you will probably be prepared In the 30s, we had a horrible time called the Great Depression. A lot of people came out of that very rich, successful, and happy. Most didn't. But if you can get prepared and knowledgeable, you'll come out of this way ahead of everybody else. So I would just urge you to become knowledgeable and become prepared. I don't know. I hope I survive. A lot of us are not going to survive because it's going to be so disastrous. I hope I do survive.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.